Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be about the post-Olympics discourse or conversation related to the women's football tournament at the Games. And there's two conversations in particular that I am referring to. The first being, should the women's football or soccer tournament at the Olympics be changed to an under 23 or U23 format, similar to what we see for the men? And the other big topic of conversation that happened during these Olympics is, does the US women's national team defeating Brazil in the gold medal match mean that the NWSL is the best women's football league in the world? Reason being that majority of the players on the US team and many of the players on Brazil play in the NWSL, and so that is why this argument has come out. Now, obviously, these are very controversial topics that a lot of people have very different and strong opinions on in terms of what is right. And so that's what I'll be talking about today. So firstly, let's just jump into talking about the U23 format. Now, for those of you who don't know, the women's football tournament at the Olympics is for senior national team players, whereas for the men's football tournament at the Olympics, it is only U23s that play. There's a long history related to men's football at the Olympics. For many years, it was only amateur players that could play. So people who were part of the senior national team weren't even allowed to compete, all the way until the 1980s, when finally the Olympics allowed professionals to play at these games. But at that point, the FIFA World Cup had established themselves as the best and greatest football tournament in the world. And so they didn't want a lot of competition. And so eventually in 1992, the Olympics was officially changed to a U23 format. And it's been that way ever since. Now, there are 3 senior national team players that are allowed on teams, but for the most part, the roster is U23. This is not what we see with women's football. With women's football, the players that go to the FIFA Women's World Cup are the same senior national team players that are going to the Olympics. And so this is what a lot of people were talking about, particularly after the games finished. There was a lot of people who were complaining about the quality of the football that they had watched over the past 2 weeks. A lot of them were saying it was poor quality football. Many were saying the players looked tired, exhausted. They were dragging themselves across the field. And so as a solution, I guess, to these issues, some people were saying this is why it should be a U23 tournament. In addition, there were many people who said football at the Olympics is not important. So therefore, the Olympics is not an important tournament. And so, yeah, we don't need to be sending our senior national team players. It should just be a U23 tournament. Now, when it comes to whether you think the Olympics is an important tournament or not, I think that from a fan perspective, it's obviously just going to be subjective. Like, it's based on your opinion whether you think it's important or not. If you look at the players on the pitch, there were players who were crying after they got eliminated. There were players who were celebrating in joy after they won the tournament. So if I'm looking at the players think the Olympics is an important tournament. The players value the tournament. Now, fans sitting at home may think this is not an important tournament. And I think a lot of people who say it's not an important tournament are fans of the men's game. And in the men's game, yeah, that is a reality that football especially in the most recent years, isn't super important at the Olympics. But I think for women's football, that is not the same. But if we talk about the argument that a lot of people are saying in terms of the players looked really tired and they were dragging themselves across the field, I think it's one of those situations where it's like yes and no for me. Obviously, this video is my opinion, but I would say yes and no. I think on the one hand, the women's Olympic tournament in and of itself is a difficult schedule. It's a 2-week tournament. And if you make it all the way to the gold medal match or the bronze medal match, you're playing 6 games. So basically 6 games in 2 weeks. So it's working out to about 3 games a week. And so, yeah, that's a difficult schedule. In terms of using the argument that the players were tired, I mean, I didn't see many people talking about tired players last year during the World Cup. I didn't see many people talking about tired players during the Euro Cup. And to be honest, based on what I've seen, a lot of people who are strongly thinking that the Olympics should be U23 are European football fans. And so that's why I bring up the World Cup, because last World Cup, the top 3 teams were Spain, England, and Sweden. And no one was talking about how tired they were. And they don't talk about tiredness during the Euro Cup. But this year, when none of their teams finished in first or second, now suddenly tired is being brought up. I don't know about so I don't know about that argument. I think there's some other reasons that people bring that up because maybe their team didn't do so well and so now suddenly the Olympics isn't important. But if we talk about tiredness, I do think there's some merit to that because as I mentioned, there are 3 games that are played basically per week. That in and of itself is not drastic. I think, especially for top teams that are involved in Champions League, we see this all the time. I'll use Chelsea as an example. Oftentimes, we'll see Chelsea play a WSL team on Sunday. They'll play a Champions League game midweek, and then the following Saturday, they're playing another WSL game. So, 3 games on its own isn't a big deal. Now, I think where this becomes an issue is when you consider the size of the Olympic rosters. Now, there are only 18 players that can be named to a squad. And unfortunately, a lot of the times the coaches do not do a lot of rotations, they don't do a lot of subs. And so now you have the same 11 starting most of the games and playing full 90s most of the time. And so that's where playing 3 games in a week becomes a little bit more difficult. Another thing to consider, if I use the Chelsea example again, the competition, the stakes are different. You know, if Chelsea could have a game against a last place team on a Sunday, Champions League, and then the following Saturday they're playing against a mid table team. There's a lot more opportunity to do rotations, players who don't usually start. Maybe you can start them because the competition is lower. At the Olympics, you do not really have that luxury. Every game matters, and the difference between being in the tournament versus being eliminated could be 1 loss. And so that's why we end up with these situations where you have a lot of coaches. Emma Hayes is a perfect example. She was barely doing any subs. There were games, multiple games, the US went into extra time, and at that point Emma had barely done any subs, if any. And so this is where playing 3 games in a week can be a bit of an issue. And so, with that argument, I do agree. Now, does it mean that the solution is we should just make this a U23 tournament? I personally don't agree with that. For starters, I think there are a lot of players who are part of their U23 teams who play professionally as well in Europe. If I use the England U23 squad, for example, I think every player on that roster either plays in the WSL or in the championship. And so shouldn't they be tired too? Like if the argument to if your argument is it should be a U23 tournament because your players are tired, then those U23 players are also going to be tired. So I don't know. But I do think that there should be something that's done. I would say increase the roster size at the Olympics. I don't think it should be 18. Right now it's 18 plus they allow 4 alternates. I think just make it 22 people that are part of your team, no alternates. And I know people don't like to enforce too many rules, but they could maybe make a rule that forces coaches to have to use all their players. Maybe something like every player on your roster has to play a minimum number of games at the tournament. It has to play a minimum number of 2 games, for example, at the tournament. Now, this essentially guarantees a situation where you're not going to have the same 11 players starting and playing the full 90 because there are rules in there that indicate that you need to play every player at least a minimum number of times. Obviously, this is just something I'm coming up with on the spot, but I do think there are alternatives that can be thought of before immediately scrapping the Olympics women's tournament as a senior competition and making it and jumping straight to U23. The reason I think this way is because I don't think women's football is at the stage yet in terms of quality to be a U23 tournament, to be honest. Now, if I use a European team, for example, let's say I use Spain as an example. If you're a fan of this Spanish women's national team, if you think about FIFA windows that happen, typically European teams tend to play other European teams in friendlies. There's also the UEFA Nations League. That's a new European competition that was created, which obviously has European teams facing each other. And then you have the Euro Cup. And then, of course, there's a World Cup, which has more slots dedicated to European teams. So if you're a fan of a European women's football team, you get to see your team face some of the best competition in the world. Now, I say this because if you look at the FIFA rankings, of the top 30 teams ranked in FIFA, 20 of those top 30 are from European countries. And from those who are from the Americas, so like North America, South America, Central America, it's 5 out of 30. Asia is 5 out of 30. Africa, 0 out of 30. And so for you, yeah, maybe the Olympics isn't important if you're a fan of like Spain, for example, because there are so many other opportunities you get to play the top teams in the world. But what if you're from Zambia? And I'm just using Zambia as an example. What if you're from Zambia? The highest ranked African team in FIFA is Nigeria, and they're ranked 36. Zambia, which also made the Olympics in addition to Nigeria, I think they're now 62nd ranked. They used to be 64th. I think they're now moved up to 62nd rank in the world. So if you're a team like Zambia, of course, you have the African Cup of Nations, then you have other friendlies that are usually going to be against other African countries. There's nothing wrong with that. But the Olympics is one of those opportunities where you get to play the top competition in the world, which of course, in the long run, is going to improve the quality, not just of Zambia, because they get exposed to this higher quality of play, but women's football as a whole will benefit from having teams of lower quality get more opportunities to play teams of higher quality. And that's what the Olympics provides. And so, I don't know, I think part of what bugs me a little bit about this conversation that I see online, particularly from fans of European football. I don't want to say Europeans because I don't necessarily know where these people are from, but people who definitely very strongly value European football, I find that the thinking sometimes is a little bit selfish. I'm not saying the people are selfish. I'm not saying the people are selfish, but the thought process is a little bit selfish because they know they're good. They know their competitions are good. They know their friendlies that they get to play are good in terms of quality opponents. They don't care about the Olympics to the detriment of the rest of the world, where the Olympics very much is necessary for them to get to compete against some of the best in the world. And so that's what I mean when I say I don't think women's football at the Olympics is there yet when it comes to becoming U23 tournament. I think in the long run, yes, absolutely. I think if we get to the quality of play that you see in men's football, which has decades, years ahead of us in terms of playing, so of course their quality is going to be better than what you see in women's football, which is a growing sport. If we get to a level in quality that is higher, then yes, consider a U23 team or a U23 tournament. But I think right now, quality isn't there yet. So why would you want to get rid of a competition where best teams get to face each other and in turn improve their play? Also, another thing that's really important to note about this U23 conversation is that most teams do not have a U23 team part of their federation. If I use the 12 teams that qualified for this year's Olympics, seven of those of the 12 teams don't have a U23 program. And so again, it comes back to this idea of like this selfish thinking, because if you, most European teams, maybe all, do have U23 programs. And so of course, if you're a fan, you're like, yeah, just make the Olympics U23, not realizing that many of the rest of the world don't have these programs because the federations don't care. Maybe financially, they don't even have the ability to support their senior team, let alone creating a U23 team. And so it's definitely a privileged take, in my opinion. But again, if I'm playing devil's advocate with myself, I do understand the concerns that fans have about players not being able to get rest. And so that's why I do think, like, in the long run, I too would like to see a situation where perhaps it does become U23. Because if we think about a 4 year window, you have your continental cups, then you have a World Cup, you have the Olympics. So in a 4 year window, basically these players only have one summer off. I think over time, we're probably going to see more teams join leagues, which is going to make expand the schedule. So players are going to be playing longer throughout the year. And so having at least 2 summers off is going to be beneficial for everyone. And so I do agree that eventually it should be U23 tournament. I just think quality wise, I don't think we're there yet globally around the world. Now, obviously, this is just my opinion again, and I know there are probably going to be people watching this who disagree and do think it should become a U23 tournament. If that's you, definitely leave some comments down below of why you think it should be U23, or if you agree with me, also leave some comments down below for sure. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching the video. I decided to split these conversations into 2 videos as it ended up being a bit longer than I wanted to upload. So I'll be posting part 2 in a couple of days where I talk about the post-Olympics discourse that was related to what is the best women's football league in the world. But as mentioned before, please leave your comments down below on whether you think the women's football tournament at the Olympics should become a U23 tournament. Thanks so much for watching. As always, please subscribe if you like the content, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.